good evening. Hey, I hope everybody has had a great start to their week. I hope your Monday has been full of awesome stuff and the presence of the Lord and being and staying encouraged and doing cool new things and possibly some rest for some of you. Um, I'm glad you're joining with us tonight. We're going to talk about boundaries tonight. Boundaries are not something that we do really well as a church body as a whole historically, and it's something that we want to grow in, particularly at Worship Life Columbus. It is having excellent boundaries is a marker for. Is one of the markers of the character and the identity of Jesus in us. And sometimes we think that a lack of boundaries. I'm not gonna teach tonight, but sometimes we think a lack of boundaries means that people get an inroad to be loved more by us, and that's a huge logical fallacy. And so we're gonna dive into that. Not me specifically, but I'm gonna learn right along with you tonight. But I wanted to really quickly share a couple of really cool things that were shared with me today. Um, as I was talking to some church people, I got a couple phone calls today, and one of them was, "Hey, the prayer time that we had together on Easter Sunday was sort of like a hinge point for my family. We were having some difficulties, and we this past week we have kept going back to that moment where we felt like the Lord said some specific things and did some specific things for us. And now we're seeing some better patterns and some better communication habits, and we're seeing some really cool stuff happening in our life, in our family life, as a result of some things that Jesus did on Easter Sunday. So that was super encouraging to me. I loved hearing that. I loved hearing how this person was just excited at the progress that they felt like Jesus was helping them to make. And Jesus wants to help us make progress in our life. He wants to take us from this place of faith to the next place of faith, from this place of glory to the next place of glory. Number two, I was talking to someone else on the phone, and she said she has been with us a good little while, and we talk regularly. But she said to me, when David said to me one time, "Hey, well, what does the word say about that?" I thought that David was just trying to get me out of his hair and trying to put me off. She said, "But I've really, during this time of isolation and quarantine," um, she said, "I've really put him to the test on that, just checking out to see what the word of God says, because," she said, "I was partly testing David. I was and she said, I was partly testing the word of God. She said, I was really just diving in to sort of find a hole in that plan." And she said, "What I found is that the Lord is just making himself so available to me. He is speaking to me." And she said, "I feel like I have this spiritual tool belt around my waist now that's being filled up with all these kinds of tools." And she's like, "I have so many tools now, and I'm coming out of quarantine with these things that I'm learning to use." And so she said, "You're going to have to help me learn to use them." But the cool thing about that is she was putting the word of God to the test, and she was finding that it is absolutely the infallible word of God that is full of power to... The word of God is useful for teaching us, rebuking us. And sometimes we need to be rebuked, correcting us, instructing us, and training us so that we can be thoroughly equipped for every stinking thing that we do. And so I want to encourage you, that this time of pause is not yet over. And I want to ask you to make the most of this time of pause. Instead of sitting and panicking and watching whatever your news brand is, I want to ask you to encourage yourself in the Lord and to get into a place where you're coming out of this quarantine encouraged and looking at your life as victorious and getting into a place of growth. Don't wait till quarantine is over to say, "I'm going to leap into growth." Leap into growth now. If you haven't already done so, seize the moment and go somewhere with Jesus, because he is standing, waiting, ready for you to move with him. This has been the perfect pause for me in my life in some areas. And I just really pray, I earnestly pray that you're making the most of it as well. So tonight we're going to talk about boundaries, and I think if we can shift the camera over to Philip.
Yeah, David's got that. All right, so we will jump right in. So boundaries. So first, what is a boundary? A boundary is a definition of where one thing ends and another begins. So in boundaries in relationships, what that means is it's a definition of who you are and who the other person is in the relationship between you. So especially in bad relationships or relationships where things have been muddied or where you haven't had good boundaries for a while, it can be very difficult to discern where, especially with emotions or things, where your emotions begin and where theirs begin, because everything just gets muddled together. And the way that we know and stand firmly in who we are and not be affected by everybody else's function or dysfunction is by having a clear definition for ourselves of who we are and who we are in each relationship in our lives.
That's good.
So, all right. So, in our little example, I got us a little whiteboard right here today so this is you. And so there is but one person who gets in this little boundary, and I'm putting a little cross that is poorly drawn right there for us. Because there is only actually one relationship that is going to breach through and be with you in all of your boundaries, like bypassing them all. And that is Jesus, because he brings you spiritually to a place of oneness with him. There are still differences and things between you and Jesus, but most of us don't have an issue with being different from Jesus. Okay, so this is us alone in our little bubble, right? And what this bubble is this is our first boundary. This is the deepest places of ourselves, what we cherish about ourselves, and one of the things that is very important in your Christian life to develop is secrets. To develop a secret place, to develop intimacy with God on your own, by yourself, in a place that nobody else goes within yourself. There is a temptation in the excitement, and it's amazing and it's good and it's valuable, and we need to have testimonies and share, and like that is great. But you also need to hold some to yourself, because there are, if you want to go further in intimacy with God, treasure and build up those things as if they're valuable secrets. And the little things he does for you in private, he will do more. You will experience more and more and more the more you value and treasure those. If you share 100% of everything God does for you, then you're probably just getting, that much. Okay, so this is our first boundary. So we don't let anyone have full reign and access in our lives. But we do have relationships. So we're just going to use X's for other people. Keep this simple and easy to draw, because I'm not an artist in drawing on whiteboards. All right, so these are the people who are closest to us. So a lot of people have their spouse, their kids, their closest family, or maybe their closest friend that has been with them for a long time. And these people have a greater influence on our lives. They have a greater ability to demand resources from us. And it's a two-way street, and we have the same demand on them and influence in their lives. So we'll come out a little further. So these will be the other families you're not so close with. the community members, your friends, and then we're going to go out even a little further. And we're just going to do some bigger ones to represent more people. All right. Out here are, probably most of fellow church members that you aren't super close with yet. Maybe your work friends, your neighbor, people that you are friendly with. It is a good relationship, but it's just not a deep one, and that's okay. And we're going to go out even further. All right, and these are strange. We're gonna call this strangers on the street.
Strangers.
These are the people that that are polite. You're friendly. They're as far as you can tell, safe people, but you barely or don't know them. And then we're gonna speckle out some people out here. Okay, and there's, people everywhere. All right, and so we have the people who are outside of our boundaries altogether. And we're going to talk about these guys a lot, but this will be people who can't respect your boundaries, can't respect you, violate your boundaries, violate you, speak against you, the people who mean you harm and do not desire to have a relationship with you on any agreeable terms. Okay, so each relationship, so every circle that we have the X's in has a different ability or a different level of access into us.
Yeah.
And so that access can be as simple as you might have two neighbors, and one neighbor, we'll say this is a neighbor, and this is a neighbor. This neighbor probably doesn't come over and ask to borrow your lawnmower, but they might ask for a cup of sugar, right? There's a big difference between loaning those two things out. This neighbor, you could probably hand them tools, you could probably hand them lawnmower, and you get even closer, you're getting into family and closer people to you. You could give them your car to run an errand, things like that you would not trust the neighbor you barely know. What ends up happening when we don't have boundaries is it begins to be more and more difficult to distinguish between the people who should have access to, like, our car and the people who shouldn't get more than a cup of sugar. And so you end up giving your car to the person trying to be loving and nice and kind, and allowing this person who does not have a close relationship, you give them your car and they run off and wreck it. And now you have no relationship, so you can't actually be restored in that. And all you ended up doing was becoming violated in that. So you allowed someone out here to have access to you like someone in here. Over and over again, we'll see that this is the most common thing with how a lack of boundaries shakes our lives and even how we view ourselves, because we teach people how we want to be treated by how we treat ourselves and how we treat others.
Yes.
So if you try to relate to everyone in the same way that you do the people who are absolutely closest to you, then everyone's going to think that they have unfettered access to you. And so their demands on your time, your energy, your resources, and influence over you, they're going to demand it at this level when they don't have the relationship, or they have the relationship of this level. Now, it might seem like an oversimplification, and in a way it is, right? Because it's not a certain amount of circles, and it's not a certain, and who you have in what circles is different for everybody because everybody's relationships are different. But the most important part is that you recognize that you teach people how to relate to you.
Come on.
So a good way to parallel this is with how nations communicate and treat each other. So if one nation is bordering another nation, right? So we'll say America and Canada, right? So the U.S. and Canada share a common border. So there is a boundary line, and there's actually a decent little chunk of space where they don't allow trees to grow. It's actually, you can see it from the Google Earth. It's kind of cool looking. So there is a boundary, and when you cross over that boundary, there are rules for how you can cross in and out of America or Canada going into the other country. And it's important because our leaders in America have taught Canadian leaders how it is and is not acceptable for people to cross into America, and the leaders of Canada have taught American leaders what is okay for going in and out of Canada.
Right.